Let's now calculate some of these ratios in Excel. Before we do that, I want to explain the layout of this Excel workbook. There's been a lot of intention behind the layout of the workbook so that it's easy to follow, easy to check for errors, and so on. So let's look at each sheet. This is the completed workbook for one of our companies called Big Retailer. We're going to work through a blank copy and calculate the ratios. So it's really important to have a cover page that explains what the model does, and there are hyperlinks to the various pages in the workbook. Our financial statements are on the second tab, and we've intentionally kept them all on one sheet. And I'll just flag, we go to income statement, then we go to the cash flow statement, and then we can go down to the balance sheet. And then finally, we'll need this. There are some extra calculations that come from those three financial statements. One is, how do we calculate our net operating profit after tax, and how do we calculate invested capital, as well as how do we calculate something called net assets. Next, we have our ratio calculations. And this is really critical to make your template easy to follow and check for errors. We could have hidden all these calculations. So here's our return on equity. And we could have, I'm going to just do this right now. We could have just done this and put the formulas right in the cell. So like in cell 08, we just would link those to the financial statements. That's okay, but it's hard to follow and it's harder to find errors. So instead, it's really important to show your calculations and break things down into steps. Whoops. And let me go a bit more. So here we have the net income number. We can make sure they're matching along the way, and it allows us to follow through to the calculation. If we want to make it look pretty later, again, we can always hide rows or columns as I was just doing. Two of the output sheets are something called a 3-step DuPont pyramid and a 5-step DuPont pyramid. And I'm just going to zoom in. You want to be thinking about the layout. This is where a learner or reader may go immediately. So let me just zoom in, and I'll zoom in a bit more. And you can see we have it color-coded so that we can look for trends. And we'll explain more as we go through the course what this DuPont pyramid is about. But it's an output sheet that is driven by our ratio calculation sheet. So you always want to have your inputs separated from your processing calculations, which is our ratio calculation sheet, from your outputs. In this case, we have two output sheets, one called a 3-step DuPont pyramid and one a 5-step. We have been using CFI's best practice modeling guidelines throughout this workbook. So just another thing to note, if you're new to CFI, blue is for inputs and black is for where you're linking it to another cell. So our inputs are in blue, and anything in black means it's linked to another cell. Okay, next thing I just want to flag is we're going to look at 3 retailers. These 3 retailers, Big Retailer, Mid Retailer, and Small Retailer, are actually based on real companies. Big Retailer is based on a general merchandiser who sells clothes and household goods as well as groceries for a very large retailer that operates in 30+ countries. Our Mid Retailer is in the same space, general merchandising with groceries, but only operates in about 10 different countries. And our Small Retailer does the same thing as the other two, but only operates in one country. I'm going to demo first always by going to Big Retailer. Then I'm going to give you the option to have a second go at Mid Retailer, and then we will test your knowledge with Small Retailer. Now, if you already figured it out with Big Retailer, please feel free to skip the Mid Retailer activity and go right to the Small Retailer. You'll see what I mean as we do this first section. Okay, let's get started. Okay, you can watch me, but ideally what I'd like you to do is open Big Retailer blank, that worksheet, and find your way to the ratio calculation sheet. And it should look like what you see on the screen. Now, before we get into the numbers, I'm just going to show you a couple of things around modeling. I'm going to try to use shortcuts whenever possible so that you can build up your expertise in shortcuts, but also explain more the layout of this financial analysis in Excel. There's a lot of practical elements that have gone into this. I mentioned many of them already, but I want to give you another example. Often, people will calculate return on equity, but they won't actually tell the person using the spreadsheet even how they're defining it. Recall that some ratios can be defined differently, even though the name sounds the same. So we're making the definitions very transparent so everyone knows what goes in the numerator and the denominator. It's also a great aide-memoire for us to remember. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to try and minimize the links we have to other sheets. This will limit the amount of errors that creep into a model, and I'll show you how that works in a second. So you can see, for example, there's net income in a return on equity calculation. So I'm going to go plus to indicate that I'm going to build a formula. And I'm going to go Control Page Up to go to the financial statements sheet. And I'm going to go find net income. The income statement's right at the top. That's row 30. Now, yes, I've linked to another sheet, but now every time net income is referred to on this sheet from now on, I'm only going to link it to that initial net income or another net income on the sheet so I can double check I'm still pulling the correct number and not having to bounce between sheets. This is also going to really speed up our ability to do this analysis. Okay, we're going to look at return on equity, return on assets, return on invested capital, but you'll also see a fourth ratio here we haven't talked about yet, which is return on net assets. It's very, very similar to invested capital, and some people actually refer to return on invested capital as return on net assets because you will see that the denominators, although they look different, are actually the same number. In order to make these ratios slightly different, we're defining return on net assets as just net income divided by property, plant, and equipment plus net working capital, and we're defining return on invested capital as we've seen already. Okay, so let's get return on equity done. So I'm going a plus sign, and then I'm going to Control Page Up. I need to go to the balance sheet. And on the balance sheet, I need total shareholders' equity, which is in row 101. I'm going to highlight and copy across, and then I'm using the fill right command, Control R. And if we want to look at the ratios, we can see that the return on equity in year one was 20%, but then it declines significantly by more than 50% to 9.2% in year 5, with a bit of a recovery in year 6, 7, and 8. It'll be interesting to see if we can understand more of what's causing this. Now let's do return on assets. The denominator is total assets on the balance sheet, so Control Page Up, and I'm going to find total assets, which is row 84, and we're going to copy that across. Again, Control R. We need net income again, so I'm going to capture it there. Now we're going to go find property, plant, equipment plus net working capital. And I'm going to go Control Page Up. And I'm going to the very bottom here. And you can see there's NOPAT calculated for us already, invested capital, and net assets. But as you hopefully can see right away, net assets and invested capital are exactly the same. We're just splitting the balance sheet up into net assets and invested capital, and they have to balance because the balance sheet has to balance. So in this case, we're going to take it from row 135. We're going to copy that across. And with ROIC, or return on invested capital, we're going to take NOPAT, or net operating profit after tax, and divide it by invested capital. Okay, here we go. We are done. Now, if you feel like you've got it, you figured it out, feel free to skip mid-retailer, which is just another practice session with a different retailer, and go on to test yourself with small retailer. However, if you want another practice, watch mid-retailer with me and work through it with me. I'll see you in a second. Now let's do this with mid-retailer. Recall that if you feel really comfortable, feel free to skip this. Just hit continue, complete and continue, and try out small retailer. Okay, so here we go again. We're going to take our net income. We're going to find it on the financial statements worksheet. It's 2058 in row 30. And then we're going to get our total equity from the balance sheet. So we're going to scroll down. Let's get total equity. In row 101, we're going to copy that across. Recall that our big retailer had a return on equity of 20%, but then was declining. Here we have a mid-sized retailer that operates in about 10 different countries versus large retailer that operates in 30 plus countries. But you can see the return on equity, if anything, has been improving, and it's certainly north of 20% for the most part. So significantly higher returns for shareholders. Okay, let's do the other ones. We link net income. I'm also going to let that link happen. Just to speed things up, I need to go to the balance sheet. So control page up. Let's go to total assets, which is row 84. Copy that across. Now let's go to find net assets. And we're going down to the very bottom, row 135. We can copy that across. And finally, we have NOPAT and invested capital. Here's our NOPAT. Here's our invested capital, row 128. Copy that across. Okay, let's just scroll across. Let's see all these ratios. And again, they're looking similar across the way. We'll need to explore more of this when we get into some more of the operational ratios. Now it's your turn. Have a go with small retailer. Bye for now.